Good evening. Welcome to NBC. Shocking news from the White House. General MacArthur relieved of his duties. Details next. Good evening. I'm your lead anchor, Steve Karandy. Tonight, as reported earlier, shocking news from the White House. General MacArthur has been relieved of his duties as United Nations commander in Korea. President Truman relieved the general of his duties after General MacArthur may have kicked a beehive. For further details, we go to our in-the-field correspondent, Steve Karandy. General Douglas MacArthur received the Medal of Honor for his service in the Pacific Theater during World War II and was an American war hero. When North Korea invaded South Korea in 1950, MacArthur was named commander of the United Nations forces in South Korea. He gained even more notoriety and popularity after his amphibious assault at Incheon was successful. The landing behind enemy lines gave MacArthur's forces the upper hand in the conflict. MacArthur then invaded North Korea with the authorization of President Harry Truman. This provoked China to become involved in the Korean conflict, despite MacArthur's assurances to the president that China and the Soviet Union would remain uninvolved. After China's entrance into the conflict, the United States and South Korean forces began to lose ground. The situation was stabilized by April 1951, but MacArthur pressed Truman for permission to bomb Chinese bases in Manchuria and found himself at odds with Truman administration's policies. He openly spoke of his disapproval and claimed the restrictions placed on his forces were handicapped and criticized Truman's policies before the U.S. House of Representatives. MacArthur also issued an ultimatum to China without President Truman's approval. On April 11, 1951, President Truman sent a letter to MacArthur relieving him of his duty. Truman stated that MacArthur had failed to respect the authority of the president. The move was unpopular with the public and sparked a constitutional crisis. Though civilian control of the military was a tradition and required by the Constitution, it had never been determined whether Congress or the President was the higher power. MacArthur's dismissal confirmed the power of the President and set a precedent that would allow military leaders to be dismissed for disagreeing with government policy. The majority of the American public sympathized with MacArthur, and a new philosophy known as MacArthurism developed, which reflected the belief that in matters of war, the military knows what is best. We now go to the White House with a message from President Truman.
My fellow Americans, I want to talk to you plainly tonight about what we're doing in Korea and about our policy in the Far East. In the simplest terms, what we're doing in Korea is this: we are trying to prevent a third world war. The communists in the Kremlin are engaged in a monstrous conspiracy to stamp out freedom all over the world. If they were to succeed, the United States would be numbered among their principal victims. It must be clear to everyone that the United States cannot and will not sit idly by and await foreign conquest. The only question is, when is the best time to meet the threat, and how is the best time to meet it? The best time to meet the threat is in the beginning. It is easier to put out a fire in the beginning when it is small than after it has become a roaring blaze. And the best way to meet the threat of aggression is for the peace-loving nations to act together. If they don't act together, they are likely to be picked off one by one. The aggression against Korea is the boldest and most dangerous move the communists have yet made. The attack on Korea was a part of a greater plan for conquering all Asia. I would like to read to you from a secret intelligence report which came to us after the attack. The report tells what a communist officer in the Far East told his men several months before the invasion of Korea. Here's what he said: in order to successfully undertake the long-awaited world revolution, we must first unify Asia. Java, Indochina, Malaya, India, Tibet, Thailand, Philippines, and Japan are our ultimate targets.
We've just received word that General MacArthur is on his way to the Capitol building to address Congress for a final time. But in the meantime, we will explain what President Truman had to say. President Truman simply reiterated that the ultimate goal in Korea is containment. He wants to keep smaller countries such as Japan, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia from falling to communism, which is known as the domino effect. We now turn the microphone over to General MacArthur.
The issues are global and so interlocked that to consider the problems of one sector oblivious to those of another is but to court disaster for the whole. While Asia is commonly referred to as the gateway to Europe, it is no less true that Europe is the gateway to Asia, and the broad influence of the one cannot fail to have its impact upon the other. There are those who claim our strength is inadequate to protect on both fronts, that we cannot divide our effort. I can think of no greater expression of defeatism. If a potential enemy can divide his strength on two fronts, it is for us to counter his effort. The communist threat is a global one. Its successful advance in one sector threatens the destruction of every other sector. You cannot appease or otherwise surrender to communism in Asia without simultaneously undermining our efforts to halt its advance in Europe.
What the general is saying is that the fight against communism is not just one fought in Europe or Asia. Rather, instead of two wars on two fronts, General MacArthur believed that it was one war against one common communist enemy. He will further reiterate this point in his upcoming segment, which he mentions containment and keeping the enemy at bay.
Beyond pointing out these general truisms, I shall confine my discussion to the general areas of Asia. Before one may objectively assess the situation now existing there, he must comprehend something of Asia's past and the revolutionary changes which have marked her course up to the present. Long exploited by the so-called colonial powers, with little opportunity to achieve any degree of social justice, individual dignity, or a higher standard of life, such as guided our own noble administration of the Philippines, the peoples of Asia found their opportunity in the war just past to throw off the shackles of colonialism and now see the dawn of new opportunity, a heretofore unfelt dignity and the self-respect of political freedom. Mustering half of the Earth's population and 60% of its natural resources, these peoples are rapidly consolidating a new force, both moral and material, with which to raise the living standard and erect adaptations of the design of modern progress to their own distinct cultural environments. Whether one adheres to the concept of colonization or not, this is the direction of Asian progress, and it may not be stopped.
Along with Truman, General MacArthur also agrees that communism needs to be contained. While it is a global struggle, it is to start in Europe, where he has been fighting. Thank you, General. We now turn it back over to our lead anchor, Steve Karandy. Back to you, Steve. Our forces now press forward without the leadership of one of the greatest war heroes in American history. We must ask ourselves, can communism be contained? Will it stay in China and the Soviet Union? Will Korea fall, and will there be more dominoes that fall after? We don't know. All we can say is, we press on. Our thoughts and prayers are with our men and women stationed around the globe. And good night. This is Steve Karandy, lead anchor, NBC News. Good night, and good luck.